Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Flying Goat Farm podcast with me, Lisa Check. This is episode 2 of season 4, and we're going to be talking about different fabrics that clothes and textiles are made out of. But here's what's happening on the farm. It is the first week of May, and it's only 2 days away to Maryland Sheep and Wool, which is the oldest and some say the biggest fiber festival in the country. Started next year will be the 50th year. So this year is year number 49. And it is a big deal. I've been a member of the organizing committee for, I think, 10 years because I joined it before season 40, or the 40th one. So I think about 10 years I joined the committee, and there are over 100 people on the committee, with parts as small as selling t-shirts or folding t-shirts, or like what Bill does is he puts up the racks for the t-shirts. One day a year, he and his friend Rick do that. All the way to, taking care of all the money and the bills and all of that stuff. It's just a myriad of people, places, things, and cogs and gears and shifts, and it's like just a massive undertaking. The week before the festival, so this week, there are fiber arts seminars going on, or workshops, and I have been a part of that committee again for 10 years. And this year, I think we had our biggest number of classes. I know our biggest number of teachers. We had 19 teachers this year. I don't think we'll have that many going forward just because, again, it's a huge undertaking. And I think we bit off a little bit more than we could chew. And not that it isn't working out fine, it is working out fine, but it's the toll that it takes on everyone, because people have to go out and get the lunches for the teachers, and somebody has to arrange the class aids, and somebody has to make sure that there's extension cords in all the rooms that are being used. Just a lot of details. And when you have that many teachers and that many classes, it's that many more things to deal with. But it's also so much fun. So yesterday I was kind of the person in charge at the fairgrounds, and people were learning how to drum card, and people were learning how to knit, and people were learning how to felt, and people were learning how to spin, and some people were learning a little bit more complex knitting. And it was just a blast. People were really having fun learning things. So, no matter where you are, there's probably a fiber festival within 50 miles of you, maybe 100 miles. And if you can, make an attempt to go, because there's usually animals involved. There's always beautiful yarns and rovings and all kinds of stuff like that. And just the sheer creativity of the people. I know in Maryland, there's a skein and garment competition. There's a competition for like photography. So there's just all kinds of creativity that abounds. And so it's just a great thing to experience. So I hope that you do. And I hope that you have a great time. And if you are in in our area in the Mid-Atlantic, think about coming out to Maryland Sheep and Wool. It's rain or shine, and tomorrow, and I think all weekend, it's going to rain a little bit. So if you're coming this weekend, wear some boots and your raincoat and maybe an umbrella. So let's get on with the podcast for this time. So basically what I wanted to talk about this time is the foundation of fabric, and how that plays into choosing clothing that is more climate beneficial and better for the environment. So there are 3 kinds of materials of textiles. They can be knitted, which is they are interlocked. They can be woven, or they can be kind of like sheets of material that isn't woven or knitted. Knitted and woven fabrics always start out as threads, and threads start out as smaller fibers, smaller, thinner fibers that are spun together to make a thread thick enough for us to work with. They can be very, very, very thin, as is the case of a fine silk that you would see in a silk scarf, for instance, or they can be as thick as some of those blankets that you see that are basically big threads, basically, of roving, it looks like, and they make these giant woven throws that you can sit under and be warm. And there are three kinds of fibers, or three big categories. There's animal-based, there's plant-based, and there's plastic-based. And so we're going to talk about those. So as far as animal based fibers, you're going to have your wool, you're going to have your alpaca, your mohair, your cashmere, your angora. Sometimes alpaca farmers will call their fleeces wool as well, but wool really is for fiber that comes off of a sheep. And depending on the breed, it's harvested once or twice a year. And then for all of these, they are all processed in the same way. You need to clean them. They get carded, which means they kind of get combed in a certain direction, and then they get spun into thread. And the fabric, again, can be knitted, woven, felted. And yes, all of these animal fibers are compostable. You can put them in your compost pile, and they will break down into nitrogen, carbon, the building blocks of a really good soil. So alpacas are sheared once a year, and the processing fabric and compostability is all basically the same. With alpacas, there are basically two kinds of fiber. There is the wakaya, which has more crimp in it, and can tend to be softer, and then there's a suri, which is long and silk-like. Mohair comes on goats. It comes on Angora goats, and so there's always kind of confusion around the words for this. Mohair goats, Angora goats are sheared twice a year. Cashmere goats, they grow a downy underlayer, and so they are actually combed. They are not sheared, and they're combed once a year around this time that the downy stuff, the downy fiber, starts to loosen itself, and you can comb it out. And Angora rabbits, they can be sheared like with scissors, or some people actually spin off their bunnies in their laps. So I put on my little chart here, I put pulled, and because they are actually pulling out the fiber from the animal, and the animal gets used to it. None of these things are hurtful in any way to the animal, and because of that, they are truly sustainable fibers. They grow back every year. So it grows freely on animals. The animals are climate beneficial. They take in grass, and they give us fiber for clothing and other textiles. And again, for these fleeces, they are not harmed in any way, and they grow year after year after year. And then you have your plant-based fibers. So the first that I have here is cotton. And there are basically two kinds of cotton. There's organic cotton, or the traditionally grown cotton. Organic cotton is going to be non-GMO, and the growers are not going to be using pesticides or herbicides on it. Again, these fibers can be knitted or woven. They cannot be felted. That only happens with animal fibers. With traditional cotton, those are full of GMOs because they use pesticides and herbicides to control the diseases that traditionally would happen on cotton. And so the seeds have been genetically altered so that the cotton itself and that plant itself is not susceptible to those herbicides. It can still grow, but all the weeds around it get killed by Roundup or something similar to that. And again, both of these, either cotton or organic cotton, are compostable. Again, you could put them in your compost pile and they will break down into carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, and make your soil very nice. So most of the issues that there are around cotton have to do with the GMOs and have to do with the industrial pesticides and herbicides. But that also takes a lot of water to grow and process cotton. Especially with the way that our world is, the climate is changing, water now is becoming an issue. So that's something to consider. To make a t-shirt, one of the statistics that I found, to make one t-shirt, it takes 700 gallons of water. That is a lot. And that's kind of stunning. You look at that, you go, really? 700 gallons of water for one t-shirt. But yeah, that's the statistic. In America, most of our processing plants were lost in the 50s and 60s. I know this because my family was working in those cotton mills. A long line of lead wells that were working in the cotton industry. But it all went overseas where the manufacturing was cheaper and there wasn't such a thing as the child labor laws. Right now, there's a lot of interest because of FiberShed. There's a lot of interest in bringing cotton manufacturing back to the United States. Because the cotton that we're getting from other countries are places where there isn't pay equity and there aren't child labor laws. If those issues are a concern for you, then ask the brands that you buy from to look for, do you have American organic cotton? The more that we ask, the more the industries will see that as a demand, and then we have a potential of bringing these manufacturing jobs and manufacturing plants back to the United States. So the other plant fiber that we can talk about are linen and hemp, and those are called bast fibers, and that's because they are long, kind of the structure of a long plant is in the stem. Linen is pretty interesting because it's actually pulled from the ground, it's not cut. And then it goes through these processes where the outside of the stems are actually rotted away, and then the linen that's inside, or the flax that's inside, goes through this process where it gets a little, they call it scrutching, which means that they manipulate it so it gets to be a little softer, and then it's spun. Again, these both linen and hemp can be knitted or woven, but again, they cannot be felted. And yes, they're compostable. So linen and hemp have a really long tradition in the Americas. And unfortunately, for the same reason as cotton went overseas, so have linen and hemp. But again, there is a resurgence in hemp and linen. The hemp interest started when it was no longer illegal to grow those plants, and so the manufacturers are getting their manufacturing up to speed to actually make a nice yarn quality fiber that we can use. We don't quite have the processing capabilities yet, but there are a lot of fiber sheds that are working to correct this, especially Montana grows a lot of hemp and they want to do more linen. And a lot of the northern states like Minnesota, Michigan are interested in working with these plants again. Now we have the whole other plant-based fiber area that includes rayon and tencel and lyocell and bamboo. And we've been fed this line that bamboo is sustainable, but it is not sustainable. It's not climate beneficial, and it really does have a pretty massive impact on the environment. These fibers are all made from wood pulp. So whether that wood is coming from a virgin forest or it's coming from a bamboo forest, it's still wood plant. And so what they do is they treat this with really, really bad chemicals, really harmful chemicals, to break down this wood and to make it a slush. And then this slush runs through the machines that extrude it, kind of like when you would see like how they would make spaghetti or something like that, only obviously much, 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 much thinner. But this slush is extruded and dried and turns into fibers that then can be turned into yarn that can be knit or woven. And while it's true that bamboo grows quickly and it regenerates itself very quickly, and that's where they get the terminology of sustainable, the processes that they're using to make these fibers is really destructive to the planet. It's destructive to the waterways. It's destructive to the workers that are in these plants because it's highly carcinogenic and dangerous chemicals. And in fact, the processes are so dangerous that rayon manufacturing was banned in the US in 2013, I believe. So we can no longer make it because it is too dangerous. And again, the manufacturing of these fibers is being outsourced to countries where there aren't environmental laws and there aren't OSHA kind of laws that will protect the workers. And the other issue of these fibers is the more that they make rayon clothing, tencel clothing, the more it uses up the world's forests. And we already know the consequences of that. And then we have our third big grouping, and it's actually the biggest grouping of fibers in clothing and textiles today. And that is the polyester, acrylic, spandex, lycra, plastic fibers. These are all made out of petroleum products. Do I need to say more? And really, what's wrong with that? We have oil. It's oil byproducts. No, there's two things that are wrong. One is the dependence on oil that we would like to not have happen. I mean, just look at our gas prices today. And the other is microfibers. And I'll be talking about the microfibers in just a little bit. These fibers are not compostable. You cannot put them in the compost pile or the landfill and expect them to go into their constituent parts of hydrogen and carbon. I mean, that's what plastic is carbon and hydrogen. But the way that these bonds are held together, they don't compost down to their constituent parts. Here's an interesting statistic is that manufacturing of these fabrics uses over 350 billion barrels, not billion, sorry, 350 million barrels of oil per year. And the microfibers that are released from these fabrics, they're released every time we wear them, every time we wash them. anytime that there's any kind of abrasion on the surface. So how many items are we talking about with this whole, idea of clothing, slow fashion, fast fashion? In 2018, which is the most recent information I could find, 80 billion with a B garments were sold. And I think that's in the United States. Projections double of that they will projections are that this will double in 15 years. So there really isn't any data about how many garments are made but not sold, and or fabric that it was commissioned to make garments but wasn't cut, and that those things are just going into the landfills. But it said that Zara, which is just one company, it's a company in Spain, they make 1 million garments per day, each and every day. So you can kind of see that, probably if there are 80 billion garments being sold, there's probably at least 80 billion garments that go unsold as well. And when we talk about, I donate my clothing, I give it to Goodwill, but only about 15% of that donated clothing is actually recycled. The other 85% is either stained or torn or otherwise unwearable, and it goes into the landfills. So what's the problem with the landfills? Well, here's one of the problems. And again, here's a statistic. In 2011, Americans trashed 68 pounds of clothing per year. Each person trashed 68 pounds of clothing per year. That's a lot. And that amounted to 13.1 million tons of clothing that does not typically compost. Some of it will. It might be a blend of cotton and acrylic or something like that. But still, the mass majority of that is not going to compost down. And this clothing is typically not going to the landfill in your community. It's going to third world landfills. In fact, I saw a photo that showed that the Atacama Desert in Chile, I'm pretty sure it's in Chile, that is vastly being filled up with old clothes that isn't compostable. It's a beautiful desert landscape, very arid, gets so little rain per year, and it is now being filled with our old clothing. And that clothing breaks down into smaller and smaller particles in the sun. And if it's in a place where there is rain and the wind, so it's being eroded, but it never composts. It just gets to be more finer and finer, smaller and smaller and smaller microfibers. That's the problem with these kind of textiles. So 63% of all textiles are made from petrochemicals, and clothing made with animal fibers is less than 2%. And then the rest, that would be 35%, is some kind of plant-based, whether it's the cotton or linen, or if it's the rayon and the rayon type fibers that are, again, destructive to the environment. Microfibers are small. They're less than 5 millimeters in any direction. And they originate in plastic textiles. Like I said before, they're released each time we wash clothing, each time we wear clothing, each time the clothing is abraded for any reason. And they are released in those plastic clothes that end up in the landfill, like I just said, under the sun and the rain and the wind breaking them down. It's estimated that 4,000 metric tons of microfibers are released each year from washing alone, just washing. That doesn't account for all those millions of tons that are in the landfills. It's a lot of microfibers. So basically, the microfibers, when we wash our clothes, the microfibers are coming off into our laundry water, and that water is going to waste treatment plants and it ends up in the sediment of those waste treatment plants. There's no way to filter out these microfibers because they're so small. And so that sediment usually ends up going into soil. So now we have soil that has a whole lot of plastic in it, right? It has all these little microfibers of plastic. And when you have erosion or if you have outflows of the wastewater treatment plants, these microfibers are going to then enter our watersheds. They're going to make their way into streams and ponds and rivers and ultimately into the ocean where they have been found. The fibers have been found in fish. They've been found in shellfish that we eat. They've been found in salt. Where does salt come from? From the ocean. They've been found in beer. They've been found in Arctic ice. And they've even been found in human and animal embryos. And that's all from the textiles that we wear. And I think we can make the leap that even though it wasn't in my research, it's in our systems as well. If it can be in an embryo, then for sure it can also be in a toddler, a teenager, an adult body as well. So then the last kind of textile that I wanted to talk about was more of the sheets that aren't woven, that aren't knitted, that aren't felted, and that would be leather or pleather, or sometimes the sheets that would be in raincoats, that kind of thing. And so the sheets can be either, an animal skin or they can be plastic. So leather is a natural byproduct of the meat industry and it's compostable. And while it's true that tanning uses chemicals to treat the pelts then do not distribute those chemicals back onto your body. Pleather is made like plastic sheeting. It's made from petrochemicals, not compostable. But there are a lot of people who prefer not to support leather and the meat industry. And again, I say that's your choice to decide, as long as you're, my point of sharing all this information is so that you are informed to make decisions that that are best for you and for your family. So here's your call to action. The fibershed.org, it's the original fiber shed that's in California, has an excellent 7-day clothing challenge. And the challenge, basically, they send you a newsletter each day for 7 days. It has some articles to read. It has some things to do. And it just is a way for you to become more slow fashion aware. My call to action this time is for you to join that challenge. And if you are watching this on the YouTube channel or my Vimeo channel, you will see the link. And otherwise, if you're listening to this on a podcast, then look in the show notes and you will find the link there that you can sign up for the 7-day clothing challenge. So until I see you again, happy making.